From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. And a very good morning to you, and welcome to the second day of November 2023 and the Black Horse Pub, where we're broadcasting from now. This is Mirador Television. It's a very nice morning out there. It's a bit frisky, but other than that, not bad, and you should go out for a nice walk, get your lungs full instead of cigarette smoke. It's some nice fresh air. Oh, don't I sound like a priest? Don't I sound like a missionary? Well, I'm not at all. I was a heavy smoker at one time, and I did manage to quit. I was just chatting to Declan here. He is in charge of making the bacon and eggs this morning, and a very fine job too. I shall expect them in front of me in about 10 minutes' time. Anyway, we have got this morning. We had a planned guest. We don't have the guest this morning. We have instead at 10 o'clock Stuart Dolby. He's got a guest, and we'll keep you in suspense about that. And we hope that at some stage around 10:30 we will have John Henty with us, with plenty of Henty. He livens up the day. But in the meantime, I shall start off this morning, as I normally do when I haven't got the two Bs around, is with what's happening in the newspapers. It's a bit of tragedy, I'm afraid, in the air this morning. And it's to do with four young men who went off on an adventure. And they, unfortunately, they didn't come back from it. So that takes up almost every newspaper this morning. Is the Mirror is so tragic, the Sun so young, the Daily Express horror, and the Daily Mail off they went and they never came back. But it's the Metro that leads off this morning. The top paper is Tragedy on Lads' Camping Weekend. 4 missing school friends found dead in their overturned car. The 4 teenagers are believed to have died after going missing during a camping weekend in Snowdonia. Jevon Hurst, Harvey Owen, Wilf Henderson, and Hugo Morris, aged between 16 and 18, have been missing since Sunday. Police searching for the friends said 4 bodies were found in an overturned car that appeared to have left the road near the village of Tremedog in North Wales. Police have not formally revealed the identity of the bodies, but those are the names that are. The Metro's front page includes a photo of the search site, with the paper describing the episode as a tragedy. Those are the 4 young men, and I thought I might have had the search site, but no. It is on one of the, as it said, on one of the papers. Those are the four young men who tragically died. How many times have you thought back to when you set off on an adventure and you wondered whether, in fact, it was going to be a bit rough and tumble, whether you'd ever come back? I have to tell you that I'm so travel conscious and so adventurous when I was younger. I was 18 for a trip out and expecting to be away from home for at least 2 years. And I went off to British Columbia, the west coast of Canada. And I had a few nervous moments, I may say, particularly in my first summer there, where I got a job Trans-Canada Highway right across Canada. Well, I didn't go right across Canada, but I was in the Rocky Mountains. And there were a couple of times when I was driving a Jeep and the Jeeps went in particularly good nick. You had to stamp on the brakes. When I came around a bend and found the wheels hanging over the cliff. But immortality of youth, those four young men like me really believed that nothing could happen to them. They were inviolate. They would be okay. And unfortunately, nothing can be further from the truth. They were found dead. Now, the Daily Express carries on with that theme. Missing boys died in a crash horror. And they have the pictures of the four young men. And they look like fun young men off on a real adventure. Wilf Henderson's girlfriend, Maddie, who the paper says posted online, "I love you so much. I'm going to miss you forever." You know, my first reaction was, why particularly would the papers place so much emphasis on four young men dying? And then I realized that as a journalist, I've often been very critical of my own profession for taking notice of a prime minister who dies and not the man in the street. Well, you can't cover every man in the street, of course, but here is an example of where they have paid attention to four young men who are unpeculiar, if that's the right word, for anything other than they are young, adventurous, and they went off on a camping expedition to Snowdonia, one of the rougher parts of the United Kingdom, not in terms of the threat of knife crime or anything of that sort, but in terms of topography, cliffs and narrow roads and rocky areas, Snowdonia is as wild as they come. I only ever was in Snowdonia once, and I did not venture up Mount Snowdon. But it is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And once again, if I can just relate something that happened to me, because to get there, we did the Calathlin Railway, which is an old mining railway that has been turned into a tourist attraction. And it's lovely. You get into little carriages and away you go. But they had overbooked on the return journey, and so they put two coal trucks on. And we, being scouts, sat on beams across the coal truck. And one coal truck came off the rails, and it bounced us around with a piece of wood, a piece of oak bouncing in, which bashed in one boy's face. And actually, I was just thrown to the bottom of the truck and given a good thorough bouncing, so I was bruised more than that. But I suppose really I hadn't expected that as an adventure going to Snowdonia. So 4 boys who did not come home, and that's what the Daily Telegraph actually it changes the headline. It's one of the few papers that actually changes the headline, and it concentrates on Jeremy Hunt and the biggest tax cut for businesses in 50 years, it predicts. Hunt vows to support entrepreneurs and is also expected to cut national insurance. Well, I've been an entrepreneur for most of my life and I never got any support from government, I'll tell you. They are very clear about who they pick, and it's always their favourites. It's always something to do with favours being delivered back to the constituencies. So don't hold your breath, entrepreneurs. But any tax break, I suppose, is welcome. Tax cuts, the other big news, it features in some other papers as well as these young men. The Daily Telegraph says businesses will get their biggest tax cut in 50 years when Chancellor Jeremy Hunt announces the autumn statement in Parliament on Wednesday. Oh, I am full of anticipation. The paper says Mr. Hunt will say the Conservatives will reject big government, high spending and high tax because we know that leads to less growth, not more. Now, the autumn statement is, to all intents and purposes, a budget statement. It how much money is going out, where the government plans to spend it, and so on. All I would say is that Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, and I watched 2 of his presentations in Parliament. And to be quite honest with you, he is all mouth and no trousers. He gave a wonderful speech. And even those people who are long-time observers said, this is wonderful. And it turned out that what he was doing was he was robbing Peter to pay Paul. But because he is such a fine orator, he managed to hide it from everybody except cynics like myself and 1 or 2 more people who were watching with me. Will Jeremy be the same? He's a ducker and diver. And I may say that when he was Foreign Secretary, he used to hide occasionally when the going got tough. In what should we say, an organization that I belonged to myself. And although I bumped into him 2 or 3 times after he'd quit, he didn't impress in that stately organization. And so I'm going to see just how well he actually performs in the House of Commons today. I should also say, though, that he traveled America to look at small-scale television. And he came back and he laid out a plan, which, because I have been in small-scale television in North America for many, many years, he laid out a plan that made a great deal of common sense. And those of us in the business whooped, wow, somebody has done something worthwhile at long last. And then he was moved from the Department of Business and Culture. Is it Business and Culture, Media, and something else? He was moved, and the civil servants rubbed their hands together and they ripped apart what he'd put together. And they put together something which is now, without any great hoo-ha, has disappeared. It was worthless. It was useless, as only civil servants can put things together. So I really do say Jeremy Hunt got one thing right. It was just that his officials ripped it apart. Ha! Ha ha ha. Right, okay. Let's go to the I. Hunt will cut personal taxes, but interest rates to remain high until... There's a guessing game going on here. Of course, particularly lobby correspondents in the House of Commons have a unique entree to ministers and officials and can get information ahead of time. But it looks to me as if they are talking to different officials. One is talking about personal taxes and the other is talking about business taxes. Which is it? Well, we'll have to wait and see until this afternoon, because their game is a guessing game. Among the tax reforms expected to be announced, says the Eye, are cuts to national insurance, which the Eye newspaper says are most likely. But the paper says interest rates are still expected. The paper's front page also reports Israel and Hamas are on the brink of a deal to release 50 women and children being held hostage in Gaza, and a 4-day pause in fighting. The Times. The banner is how to spice up your marriage. Well, since I lost my wife some time ago, I don't think I'll bother to read that. But if I may say so, the model they've used, she looks as if she'd batter you black and blue anyway. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm feminist. I've upset you, I expect. But she looks pretty grim and pretty fierce. The banner, Netanyahu backs deal to free women and children held by Hamas. But the main pictures are the pictures of the boys, which we showed you. But Hunt offers tax cuts for workers and businesses. These two stories are also carried on the front page of the Times. In its main story, Hunt's new tax measures, the paper says 28 million people will benefit from lower national insurance rates, as usual. I don't know why that is. Whenever the government gives break to businesses, I always seem to be in a business or in a position where I don't get any benefit at all. None whatsoever. So it'll be interesting to see what they're offering. The Guardian. Hunt bows to Tory demands for tax cuts in a bid to revive the economy. The Guardian finds it very difficult to say anything nice about the Conservatives. So that's damned with faint praise, I think. But then the picture that you see on your screen, or did see on your screen of the 4 young men, bodies of missing teenagers found, they are prominent. The Guardian says Mr. Hunt's tax cuts are him bowing to pressure from within the Conservative Party in an effort to close the gap with Labour in the run-up to the next general election, widely expected to be held next year. In fact, the Conservatives are doing what most governments don't like doing, is that they are getting themselves backed into a corner where they've got no leverage room, that they will call the election at the very last possible moment. And no government likes doing that because it doesn't know what's going to happen in those halcyon days just before people go and cast their ballots. The Financial Times, it takes the same tack. Hunt to put £9 billion a year tax break for business at the core of growth drive. Right, now, is it personal or is it a tax break for business? Once again, the chaps that they use in Parliament are not getting a lot of purchase, obviously, out of Hunt and his associates and his staff. They're all being very tight-lipped until this afternoon. They touch on the Open AI board, who sacked the boss of artificial intelligence, Altman, and now are being forced into a position where they have to bring him back. There was absolute chaos when he was sacked. Why they sacked him, it's not clear. But they want to put an end to chaos by bringing him back. Boy, I wouldn't want to be them meeting him in the corridor. I just sacked you and now you're back. Ooh, wonderful stuff. Yeah, there we've still got Jeremy up there for a moment. What a day it is today. I always think that the business drama of the budget is more explosive than following reporting on a war. The tension is always, and the stuff that comes out that is revealed, drip, 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 a bit at a time, really gets everybody everybody all upset. Let's go back to Jeremy for a moment, because I think there are one or two more newspaper headlines. No. I'm quite wrong. What we're going to do is we're going to see Sir Cliff Richard, because it's the Star as usual. The Star never fails to give us a bit of a giggle, and this morning it's latched on to days after the crooner dissed punks. The punks admit crooner was an inspiration to them. Never mind the Cliff Richard. The Star opts for a characteristic lighter left field story on its front pages. The paper reports that Glenn Matlock, the bass guitarist in the original lineup of the Sex Pistols, has confessed he and other members of the punk rock band were big fans of Sir Cliff Richard. The paper reported earlier this week that Sir Cliff had not been a fan of punk himself and had said some unkind things about punk. And here they come back putting coals on the head. I have no idea where that phrase came from, but heaping coals of fire on the head. In other words, you said something nasty, but we're going to say something nice. Ho, ho, ho. Right. There he is, Sir Cliff Richard. And he's beginning to look his age, isn't he? But he's a pretty fair age. Now, I was singing to myself in the bath this morning, and I must say that I still don't do as good a job as he does, and he's older than I am. So there is a lesson to be learned there. Stick to what you're good at. I'm not going to make the top 10 or even get on stage. And as for being on top of the pops, no, not me. But let's be a little indulgent. Let's be a little self-indulgent, shall we? There's Sir Cliff with all the worries of the world, and here's me with no worries for any world. Who's got the better visage? Who's got less creases in their face? Well, I have to tell you, is that the television camera is particularly kind to me, and it doesn't show all the creaks and the crevices that I've got, and for him it does, and it's just unfortunate that the television camera doesn't like him as much as it likes me. Thank God for that, because for 60 years or so, it's been my lifeblood, the television camera. So I'm glad that to some extent, for those 60 years, it hasn't treated me too badly. Right, okay. Let's just go through the papers again, so that we can see a little bit more of what's in them. The Telegraph claims the Chancellor will unveil the biggest business tax cut in half a century when he delivers his autumn statement on Wednesday. The paper describes the move as part of a significant pivot in the government's economic approach, with the focus moving from controlling price rises to jump-starting a stuttering growth. And stuttering growth we have got. And it's unfortunate, because we really have we're behind the eight ball on that. We really are. We are not. We're not leading the world, even though our situation is not as bad as we are led to believe that it was going to be. According to the Times, Jeremy Hunt will also cut national insurance for 28 million people after ministers became markedly more upbeat about the public finances in recent days. Yes, apparently they had a windfall of several $billion, £1 billion. Sometimes international finance is quoted in dollars, but no, it's several £1 billion. The Guardian says the statement will contain 110 measures to try and boost the stagnant economy, but reductions in income tax are thought more likely in the spring. Yes. Don't give them all the goodies all at once. Writing in the Telegraph, the former Conservative leader Lord Howard argues Rishi Sunak's economic plan has been vindicated. He says it was absolutely necessary to resist both unfunded tax cuts and large pay increases as part of efforts to counter high inflation. And the improving economy will now provide some headroom for the Chancellor to begin to reduce the tax burden. Ho, ho, ho. Isn't it funny that it all happens just before an election? About the Daily Mirror says Rishi Sunak and Jai Hunt are engaged in a desperate con that nobody will buy, suddenly pretending to be a pair of Robin Hoods after playing Sheriff of Nottingham to tax us at the highest rate in 70 years. Well, there's a lot of truth in that. But whether, in fact, they will actually be, as Sunak was in his statements to the House, all mouth and no trousers, will wait to be seen. We'll have to wait what was it? The Guardian says 110 measures. Oh my God, how long is he going to be on his feet? Oh, well, we will have to watch that. The vast majority of the front pages feature photographs of the 4 teenagers from Shropshire who died on a camping trip to North Wales. The Daily Mail suggests the sixth form students may have lain under 48 hours after he came off a remote road and landed partially submerged in a ditch. The Daily Express claims the friends had little driving experience between them, and local residents have told the paper the weather was atrocious at the time they are thought to have crashed. So young, says the Sun's headline. So tragic, says the Daily Mirror. And there is we'll swap Jeremy and we'll take another look at these young men, shall we? Yeah, why not? Full of life and rimming. The Mail agrees, arguing that chief constables must take on board the review's call for police and journalists to rebuild their fractured relationship if police want to restore public confidence. It says officers must embrace the mainstream media rather than treat it as the enemy. And that follows the publication of a review criticizing elements of a police investigation into the disappearance of Nicola Bulley. It prompted the Sun to conclude that what it calls the shambles was a direct result of the Leveson inquiry into the press. The paper says the inquiry all but outlawed private briefings to crime reporters, meaning the resulting information vacuum in Miss Bulley's case was filled by malevolent online trolls and self-appointed sleuths. And that is a big danger. We're far from perfect, we media types, far from perfect, and we know it. But then again, it's funny, those people who expect us to be perfect often don't seem to be that perfect themselves. It is very, very difficult to be perfect. And the media have even a bigger problem because often they are dealing with opinion. They're getting facts that people want to hide. Can be particularly difficult. The results of a poll to find the most annoying words in popular culture are featured by the Mirror, which reports that amazeballs, meaning something extremely good or impressive, topped the vote with 34%. Amazeballs, the first time I've heard that. Other words in the top 10 include hollybobs, those are holidays, bants, banter, and crimbo, Christmas. Oh, we're all going to have a jolly crimbo. Now make a note of those, right? Amazeballs. Oh, that's extremely good. Well, that's Mirador. Mirador is amazeballs. The Black Horse is amazeballs, right? Other words, top 10 include hollybobs. Well, during the Christmas hollybobs, you can come to the Amazeballs Black Horse, where if you stand at the bar, you can indulge in banter, and that's during Crimbo, Christmas. Wow! I've changed my language totally. A neuroscientist tells the male that if someone uses words we find embarrassing, we instinctively want to distance ourselves from them, as any awkward behavior can trigger a threat response. Well, there we go. There we go. Those are the news headlines this morning, and the front pages of the papers. Let's see. It is now 8:31. I think time for us to take a look at the weather. It's going to hit 11 degrees right now, approaching 9 o'clock. It's 8:30. Approaching 9 o'clock. It's only 6 degrees. That's pretty damn cool. It's going to climb slowly over 7, 8, 9, and 10 to 1 o'clock. And we'll have to wait until lunchtime to see whether, in fact, it is going to nudge over and hit that 11-degree mark. But otherwise, a very, very cool day. However, we are going to have sunny intervals. And at 4 o'clock this afternoon, or 3 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to have a full hour of sunshine. Light winds. The thing is, they sometimes say a light wind is force 3 or force 4 or whatever, but it feels like. And I suspect that the air is cold enough today that the light wind is going to feel like a gusty wind, and not a very happy experience if you're not wrapped up. What about rain? Oh, well, no. We've got a period of no rain up until, let's see, today is Wednesday, until Friday, Saturday. And according to the forecast, it's going to be next Monday before we experience any more rain. Tomorrow, it's going to be 13 degrees with light winds. Friday, going to take a dip. It'll start the day below freezing, -1, but it will reach 9 degrees. About the same as today. Saturday is going to be a full day of sun, a full day, but once again, it is going to be cold, starting at -1 and rising to 7. Sunday, it's going to warm up a bit because it'll start at 5, but it's not going to rise very much. It's only going to reach 7 degrees. And then Monday, back up to 10, starting at 4. But guess what? Rain all day. And Tuesday, rain nearly all day and no better temperature. And Wednesday, rain nearly all day and still only 9 degrees. So the rest of this week, no rain. Tomorrow, it's going to be relatively warm. But after that, we're going to experience cold winds or weather. And that's not very good. Not very good at all. I'm beginning at my mighty age to suffer from the cold. And it is getting a mite cold. And I come in on the Red Devil, my mobility scooter. Beep, beep. Oh, I sometimes hit, well, actually, if I go downhill, I hit 9 miles an hour. I do. But most of the time, it ranges between 6 and 7. I go past pedestrians and I can tell exactly how fast they're walking by measuring them against how fast my scooter is going. It ain't very fast. And nor should it be. Letting somebody like me loose on a scooter like that, I'm not so very happy at that. Now, we're going to let's see. We started to to show the bloody past of a tiny town. And we're going to re-show it. This is from our archives. We showed part one of part one the other day. Now we're going to show part one and part two to take us up to 9 o'clock. Here we go, with any luck at all.
I'm Keith Hayes, and you'll be sick and tired of my face by the time this series ends, but I hope you'll bear with me as I shuffle through the streets of this lovely town, pop in and out of its pubs, and tell you a story of its bloody past. In Saxon times, it was known as loos. The modern term for toilet might have come from it, I suppose. But the town became respectable and is now known as Lewes. Minerals come from Saxon times. And this pretty little town in East Sussex, nicely tucked under the shelter of the South Downs, has had this high street for longer than written records go back. Pretty normal sort of UK high street, really. Side looks just like High Street UK. High Street UK, from John O'Groats to Land's End, have all got a history. But this little stretch of road has a violent and bloody history. And that history reflects much of the history of the country itself. A pint pulled from a tap is the tipple of most Englishmen, I suspect. This pub goes back to 1742. There's a list of the landlords to prove it. Today, sitting on the high street, it's one of the 16 pubs in a town of 16,000. 150 years ago, there were 63 pubs in Lewes and 18 breweries. And in those days, there were only 9,000 people. Wow. On those programs, I'm going to take a closer look at some of the bloodier and more sensational events that have occurred on this seemingly normal high street. But right now, I'm just going to paint a general picture of this tiny English town. Before I get to the bloody exotic, the high street is dominated by a Norman castle. One of the oldest Norman castles in the country. It was built not long after the invasion of 1066. It housed the Norman garrison, who ensured the people living inside its walls were kept safe. And there is brick by brick evidence of the 4 gates that gave entry to the town.
By the way, lewes isn't a corruption of loo. It's the Saxon word for a hill. And if you thought that Lewes had lots of pubs, it has far more hilly roads. Far more even than the rest of the country, I think.
The modern-day Lewes is well used by its people. Lots of shops, markets, and even tea rooms. It also has a lot of parades. At the end of the school year, a ceremony takes place called pupils design and build exotic costumes ready to parade on the high street. I walked onto the high street in Lewes a couple of years ago
to be greeted with a lot of children running around in funny costumes. What on earth is that all about?
It's called Moving on Parade, and it's something we started 16 years ago. It started from a wish of parents to bring more art into schools because they see how much schools struggle demands of the government, and they wanted to support the school in that. So we started something called Patina, which is Parents and Teachers in the Arts.
Right.
Moving on Parade celebrates the transition from primary to secondary education of all the children in Lewis District Council.
Very colourful costumes. How do you decide what the costumes are? You're the artistic director, so you better give me a good answer on this.
So every year we have a theme, and the theme this year is last year we asked the community to suggest different artists that they would like to see on the parade, and loads of suggestions came in, and we shortlisted the huge list into 16 schools, which was the amount of schools that took part last year. We had Frida Kahlo, and we had Picasso, and we had Van Gogh, and we have Giacometti, and we had Andy Warhol. So they doing illustrations and designs, and then the patina artists take all the children's idea and adapt it into a practical design that the children are actually able to make in a couple of days. We invite about 8 or 10 people from every school to come and learn the skills of the carnival costume, and they start to make the big make that the school could carry. That artist is going into the school and work with the children on their individual costumes. We're trying to really do it as an enjoyment, getting people together. They're all gonna meet in their secondary school later on. We're trying that they'll meet each other beforehand as well. So we're doing events all year round for the benefit of the whole community, not just for the year sixes.
What do you do in the schools?
So our next event is on the 22nd of April. It's called Dance Your Socks Off. And because the theme this year is Wonders of Our World, we thought it'll be really fun to have an evening of teaching flamenco, bhangra, and the sirtaki with world food. We're gonna have sushi, we're gonna have international cocktails, we're gonna have professional dancers who are going to teach the dance, and it's going to be a really fun event, and that's for children as well.
See, cocktails, I told you Lewis is a drinking town.
Yeah, we're pretty good at cocktails. Growing every year. So we making contact with our twin towns. We're making contact with Lewis in America. There's a group of them, artists from Lewis in America coming to us in June. We made contact with them, and what we would really like is to use this format in other places, because that's to celebrate. They're moving on from primary to secondary schools, and it's people that hear about it, they are impressed, and it will be really nice for other people, other children in other communities to do the same.
Yeah, I did realise it was unique to Lewis and a very unusual operation. Well, how do the children react to it? I mean, generally speaking, do you get great support from the kids?
Yes, we do, and because it's been going for so many years, it becomes a part of the cultural calendar of the town. So young children know that when they get to year 6, they'll do the moving on parade, and all the siblings did it, and they've seen the rest of the older ones doing it. So it's kind of something that they look forward to.
I'm known for wearing strange costumes. As you can see, my hats are still there in this episode, so I don't think I should.
Great.
Raffaello, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
The adults have their turn, and on November the 5th, the biggest Guy Fawkes celebration anywhere in the world takes place. Exotic costumes, burning crosses, effigies stuffed with fireworks. Rousers, that is a banger to you and I, are tossed casually into the street.
Oh, I'm sorry that we've hit a problem there. Forgive us if we.
Barons were arguing with the king and his men about representation in Parliament, whereas the king, the king just had all of his men and a lot of his French relatives in Parliament, and he was taxing the barons very heavily, and all of this money was going to the French relatives or going abroad, and the barons were not very happy about this. So they wanted at least half of the 24 men in Parliament to be elected barons. So, I mean, though it's not very democratic in the sense that we have it today, it's the start of that representation of a view that is not just the king's view on how things should be run. Simon de Montfort got to hear that the king was down at the Priory of St Pancras. And why he was there was for the Feast of St Pancras in the middle of May. And of course it was a big feast and people would come from all over the world, actually, or all over Europe to the feast. So he needed somewhere as big as the Priory to be able to feed all these people and entertain them for a few days. And that's why he was here. Simon de Montfort was up country in northern Sussex in some of his estates with his men, and he heard that the king was down here and he sent messengers. He sent bishops of Winchester and London down with money, with £30,000, which is a fortune in those days, to try and negotiate a settlement with the king. The king was a little bit reticent to go into war with Simon de Montfort because, yes, they were brother-in-laws and he was an old man. They were in their late 50s at the time. Not that that's old now, but it was then. But the king's brother, Richard of Alamein, also called King of the Romans, etc., he wanted war. And, of course, Prince Edward, hothead, he definitely wanted war. So they settled, you know, the ransom money was sent back and the envoys, the bishops were sent back, and so it was war the next day. They negotiated the Mise of Lewis, most of which was, you know, yes, we took this castle, well, we give you it back, and you give us this, and we'll ransom this man and that man for this man and that kind of thing. But it also set down where the king would say, you know, 24 of the 24, we're going to have 12 elected. barons, so that we're going to have the beginning of a parliamentary election. And Simon de Montfort made the king hand over his seals, which meant that the king had no power. So Simon de Montfort became the de facto king. It changed the king's complete and outright power. And Prince Edward then went on to, as king, ratify the clauses of the Magna Carta and the provisions of Oxford. And those began to change the king's power. And it also meant things like, if a woman died as a widow, her dowry money was hers. It didn't need to be given over to her husband's family and sons and what have you.
There's a start of women's rights as well.
There you go.
My goodness
There
me.
you go. The Normans did it for us.
The man who gave the name to the House of Commons, and according to at least one historian, named America the United States, preached his heretical views in the town's pubs.
Here we go again. Pubs in Lewes. You can't get away from them.
There's a tale handed down from Crown landlord to Crown landlord that Tom Paine was barred from drinking in that bar because he harassed and harangued the regulars to the point where they wouldn't drink anymore. They were fed up with Tom preaching the rights of man. So he walked across the street to the coaching inn, the White Hart,
where a more lenient landlord turned a blind eye, or, a more likely, a deaf ear to the ravings of this revolutionary.
It seemed that he used to like to spend his social hours here and his active political discussion times here in volatile discussion with a group which I believe we thought was called the Headstrong Club, because it still meets today and they call it the Headstrong Club today. But I gather from a local historian that it was called the White Hart Dining Club. Oh. And Thomas Paine, up in our sheriff's room, the oak-panelled function room, basically plotted the American Revolution and for a struggle for independence, which resulted in the final Declaration of Independence, an authenticated copy of which we have in the sheriff's room, and he was credited with originating that. And in turn, he dubbed the White Hart Hotel as the cradle of American independence.
He had some remarkable phrases, didn't he? I mean, according to Bill Bryson, he coined the first time the phrase the House of Commons, and also Bryson says that he coined the phrase the United States. So now the White Hart goes down in history as the cradle of independence. It's wonderful. But whoever the landlord was at the time embraced him and said, "Come on in, we love to hear you talk."
certainly wasn't really. No, you're right. And yes, I think probably as any hotelier, always keen for a little bit of business, and they developed into quite an active dining club, I gather, because they had their volatile political discussions over dinner.
No record of you throwing him out of the hotel?
No, but I have to say that during the times that they have met here recently, we've had some very interesting volatile speakers, lots of celebrities, actors, and I remember Tony Benn's voice drilling through the sheriff's room door. It said, I ought not say too much, but it said that a lot of decisions are made here after the council chambers has closed. So that's interesting. Yeah, I think Lewes has embraced Thomas Paine very well. I'm very proud of him because he lived just up the road in the Bull Inn, and of course it was a very easy little trot, and even after he had imbibed, he wouldn't have far to go.
So our Tom, getting nowhere at home, he worked briefly as a customs officer in this house here, married the boss's daughter in the church here, within the town's walls, then took off to America.
In Lewes, he was ranting. In the colonies, he was making sense.
He preached revolution, and revolution was what he got. The American colonies broke away to form a new country, the United States. There are many more buildings that either face or back onto the high street. Lewes Prison is a few hundred yards up the road. It has held many famous people, including pop star Mick Jagger. Jagger famously talked his way to a prison phone, called the White Hart Hotel, and ordered a takeaway, which was duly delivered. Tucked away behind these buildings was a naval prison. 250 Russian prisoners captured in a naval battle in the Crimea War were incarcerated here in 1854. Life was harsh for the ratings, but the officers roamed the town at will, socializing with the locals and dining at the tables of the high and the mighty in Lewes. 17 of the ratings died while in prison, and a monument to them stands in the graveyard of a local church. This impressive structure was built by Tsar Alexander II, and its upkeep is still paid for by the Russian embassy in London. There are many other events that make the High Street interesting. The days of great circuses parading their animals. The Prince Regent winning a bet, driving a coach and four down the cobbled street. It's a wonder he didn't break his neck. So today I've taken a snapshot look at Lewes High Street. High Street UK. Every high street has a history. And there are thousands of high streets across the country. And this is just one of them. More high street tales tomorrow. Meanwhile, where's that pint?
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. And we'll be showing you the other 7 episodes between now and Christmas. And some of you have seen it already, but many people ask about it, and we like to think that we deliver. Oh, guess who's here? Good morning, Mr. Phillip.
Well, good morning to you, Keith. I did enjoy that programme very much.
Well, nice of you to say so. It's a quick flip through the history of Lewes, but there are a few bits there that most people have not.
Well produced and very well narrated, sir. Very good indeed.
You old sweetheart, you. Now, I'm not 100% sure because we're all over the place today. But we may have Dr. Mark Maybe joining us in a few minutes, that's the monitor gone flapping to the floor, and I've wanted you to meet him for some time. He's like you; he's got a very expansive mind, but his invitation has gone, but he hasn't appeared yet. So tell me, you had a friend and a colleague. Can you tell us a little bit about him? Because he was taken away on urgent business, and that we understand on this program, that people have other commitments and that they must keep them rather than appearing with us. But
yes,
is that the case?
He was very apologetic, but it was quite clear to me that for him to do the 9 o'clock slot today was just one job too far.
Yeah.
Because what happens in his business is he gets last minute contact from clients interested in his bespoke furniture. And he flipped between home in West Sussex and his studio in Chelsea Harbour. And when I double checked with him yesterday, it was quite obvious to me that he was actually really rather stressed. So I just said, look, we'll do it another day, Richard, when you are working from home and you can afford an hour
You're right.
without
Just
distraction.
tell us exactly what he does again.
He is the head of Richard Davidson Furniture London, based in Chelsea Harbour, and they make very, very high standard bespoke furniture, as well as mirrors and you name it, which are extremely popular with the rich and famous. But his beginnings were very humble, and I just think it is a fascinating story.
Yes,
And
indeed.
he's also a very engaging chap. I think he would do well on the programme.
Good. Well, we look forward to when he's available. Now, guess what?
But
Guess
this
who's
is-
turned up?
hey, bum 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 bum
It's
bum.
Ernest Shackleton.
Yeah, Ernest Shackleton has
With the-
come
with-
off
with-
Puffin Island or whatever it was called, gone across South Georgia, kept all his men safe for 2 years, and come away from the South Pole with no casualties. Irishman, of course, by origin, was born in Kilkee, but died in England, but was a is in fact a great hero. And lots of children nowadays learn the story of that expedition because it's meant to be a sort of not only engaging but a rather uplifting story of success in the face of failure, if you see what I mean. You know, the ship sinks, what the hell do you do? Where you hang around.
It's all very British, isn't it?
Yeah, albeit he was Irish. It's very stoical. And he got it right in the way that Scott didn't, of course.
Well, years ago, Jessica, my daughter, always with a creative eye, bought me a book which I've still got and which I must bring in to show you both, should that ever happen, about the Shackleton story. She bought it for me, because the story is interesting, but it's a beautifully illustrated book. Really is, and very, very informative. And I've still got that book. So I must show you guys that. Now, Keith was confused about whether you and I were doing this today, Richard.
Well, we can if you want to. If he's got
absolutely, I'm delighted to have you. It's possible that we might have Dr. Mark, maybe. Although I must say that I am so confused this morning that I thought it was 10 o'clock.
Don't you worry, Keith. Don't worry. We'll get going. Philip and I will talk bollocks for an hour.
Right, excellent. Yeah,
I would imagine that our topic today will run beyond an hour, but we've agreed where we break within that, and then come Friday, because in fact I'm now not working till Christmas because of my health, which is I'm yesterday I was in the Black Horse. I'll be honest with you, Keith.
I came into the Black Horse and it was totally empty.
Well, when I went in there, I was in there probably a bit later than you because I'd been elsewhere. And you weren't there. You didn't have your Formula One car outside. You didn't have your Trilby there. So I had to sit in the corner.
Before you then.
Yeah, no, I had a nice chat with Deck and the locals, all of whom talk about you, and I'd like to say they talk about you in a complimentary way, but I won't suggest that they don't. You know, I won't
Right.
suggest that there's graffiti about you. No. I think Dec's very happy to have you there, and thinks it's. And I said to him, look, Keith will pump the publicity for the place as you do, and for him that's a great thing.
Yeah.
And it's a nice little home for you, isn't it?
Yes. Well, it's one of the things that I've resisted in all the years of my endeavour in this industry is to actually do a commercial or recommend something when I didn't believe in it.
Yep.
And I have to say that the Black Horse is a pub. A dying breed, in fact, but it doesn't rely upon its food. Although tomorrow the new chef comes.
I know, yeah, I'm aware of that, but it's a proper old man's pub, and
It is.
I hate to say it, but you and I are old men.
Well, we should get
as
Phil
are
down here.
most of the other people who go in there. And it's just a joy to be there, I think.
Yes. Well,
shall
we have our first board meeting here and get Philip down?
Yeah, absolutely. And may I say that Jed is sitting in the corner over there, misses you, Keith. He's got nothing to have a pee up against, apart from your leg. I think, Keith, we're probably ready to rock and roll if you're ready.
I'm ready for you at any time.
Good man. Let's go.
Richard, introduce it.
I will do, Phil. I don't have any notes in front of me deliberately because it's a topic that it's not quite carry on. But it would be if I got through the first round on Mastermind, you have to choose a different topic, don't you?
You do.
And I think this would be my second topic.
Which is?
My second topic. And we don't tell Keith that until he's online and he's
He's live. This is all live.
No, it's not live at the moment, is it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
It's been live.
Are we all ready to go?
We're always live, yes.
So are people watching us now?
Yes, they are.
Oh, the buggers. There can't be many of them. So you're not going to do your little twiddly toot-ha thing about the Black Horse and all that sort of thing.
Oh, that's been done while you were.
All right, sorry.
Yeah.
In which case, it's completely my fault for being a bit late. I was dealing with Chambers emails. Keith, we decided, Philip and I, we looked into the past.
Philip and me.
No, Philip and I looked into.
That's better.
Exactly. And that's what I said. The history of what we've spoken about, the two Bs.
Right.
And it seemed to us that on every occasion that we mentioned somebody famous, Indira Gandhi, whoever it might be, you were very quietly, humbly able to say, well, when I interviewed her. And it rather took the sort of wind out of ourselves because it was you saying, as Max Boyce used to say, yeah, I know I was there, type thing. So what we're going to plan to do is go back in time and see how far back you go.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of your interviews.
Well, I haven't been very, very prolific in terms of interviews. Is bumping into people or having rub shoulders with them, perhaps. So I'll be interested in how you're trying to trap me today.
Well, I'm going to trap you today by somebody who was notorious for their hat, as indeed you are. Not a particularly tall fella, but who was a possibly the most significant European of the modern era, who led an empire and then saw it fall around him. And it's a subject that's close to both Phil's mind and my mind, I know. And it's Napoleon Bonaparte. And I expect you at some point in the next hour to say, well, when I spoke to him after the Battle of Waterloo, and I'm sure you did an interview with him.
It's actually the big problem with that one was getting onto Elba.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, he got off Elba, of course, didn't he?
Yes, he did, but I actually interviewed him on Elba.
I understand. And do you know what, Keith? I sometimes wonder whether you know your arse from your Elba. But anyway, that's a different point.
Yes. May I say that we great thanks to Napoleon because he introduced broadband into Elba.
Right, I didn't know that. He of course introduced a range of other things. He introduced the Code Napoleon, which Phil and I will have a sort of slightly sideways working knowledge of, which was the basis and remains the basis for the civil code in Europe and, for example, Scotland. So it's not the common law. So that's where that comes from. Codified laws. And secondly, he introduced metrification, where he said, right, let's work out how long it is around the globe, and let's cut that down into suitable sizes. So it wasn't yards, it was a little bit longer than yards, it was meters. And he did that and remained there. But of course, he came from humble origins, didn't he, Phil?
Yes, indeed.
Well, I beg to differ. He came from an Italian aristocratic family who had fallen on hard times.
Yeah.
His original name was Napoleone Buonaparte, which is Italian.
I think I've seen him on Strictly Come Dancing.
Well, quite so. But he was born, yes, in humble circumstances in Ajaccio in Corsica.
Yeah.
In 1769.
Which was, and indeed in some senses remains, a notorious island of criminals. There's a sort of mafiosa there who control the island.
Well, I knew that of Sicily, obviously, but I didn't know that of Corsica. I'm sure you're right.
No, it is absolutely right that they have their own little conclave of.
No, I'm sure you're right, Richard. His father was a flag bearer for Corsican nationalism.
Yeah, we don't need to worry about that. What we need to worry about is that, in fact, he went off and he joined the French army, and and it's an odd thing for he was a flamboyant figure, a fellow who wanted to make his name, but he fell in love with big guns and was always, throughout his career, And the reason we're talking about this, Keith, is there are two reasons. Is that firstly, there's the film coming out about him, starring Joaquin Phoenix, which is directed by Ridley Scott. And secondly, one of his bicorns, the hat that he deliberately wore sideways, like you do. I know you do that when you're on your motor scooter. Deliberately wore it sideways so people would recognize him, because everyone else wore it that, Wellington wore it that way round. Everyone else wore it forwards, backwards. But people could see the hat and say, "Oh God, that's bloody Napoleon, isn't it?" And so he made a sort of early on made a legend for himself with these things. And the film, I've yet to see. I'd love to see it, and I will see it. It's one of the few films that I will go and see at the cinema. Ridley Scott, who did which advert, Phil?
If I've ever known, I'd forgotten, I'm afraid.
Right. Well, Ridley Scott did loads of adverts before he did Aliens and various other films, and became famous for that. He did Gladiator, for example, in which Joaquin Phoenix also starred. But he did the Hovis advert.
Oh yeah, you did say. I've remembered now. Yeah,
And you'll remember that up the hill in Wiltshire with the boy pushing the bike. It's an iconic image. Voted the best advert ever. And he's 86 now. And he said, "Look, I'm very clear. I never thought I'd make a film. I was making 5 bloody adverts a week. It was good money, but I wanted to make a film." And then he went on to do that. And the other odd thing about Joaquin Phoenix, who plays Napoleon, is that he's part of the Phoenix dynasty, all of whom grew up as performing children and became actors. One of his siblings was River Phoenix, who sadly died early, and there was a lot of publicity about that. But they, in fact, all grew up in the Children of God, whom I've told you before I represented. So I sort of knew the family in an odd way. Didn't get his bloody autograph. Didn't say, "When you play Napoleon, can I come and be your Marshal Ney?" Should have done that. Didn't do that, But anyway, back to Napoleon.
Well, before you leave Ridley Scott,
Yeah.
Since you've got that connection, why don't you contact him and ask him if you'd like to interview him on this very famous television operation called...
I can imagine what he'd say, but I'll give it a try. I'll give it a
Why
try.
not? You'd be surprised.
When I finished that case for that particular religious cult, I did actually get a thank you letter from God, which was in a very florid font. And so I might actually phone up God
Yeah.
and ask him whether he'd do a half hour on... Oh, no, we've got Phil. We don't need it. It's fine. We've got Phil. It's as close as we'd ever get anyway.
Richard, you're very lucky that I'm a lot more patient with you on this program than you are with me.
I know.
Had I gone off on that tangent, you would have cut me dead. We don't need to know about that.
But I have nobody else to speak to, Phil, apart from you. You know that. So dear old Napoleon Bonaparte joined the French army. He fell in love with the big guns, and the French army throughout his time, which was many years, of course, in charge, had much larger, not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of ball size, if that's not the inappropriate way to put it, than the British Army ever had. The British Army had, the light artillery, and they had what they notionally called the heavy artillery, but nothing like the French had. And also the British had the bloody stupid rockets that killed probably more British people than they killed anybody else. But, Napoleon just then, and you'll confirm this, Phil, he played a clever game of first initially working his way through the ranks and becoming what I suppose we would call the first amongst equals. He claimed a sort of some democratic role for himself within the French Revolution.
Well, he joined the Revolutionary Army.
Yeah,
he joined as a gunnery officer.
Exactly, because that's what he was interested in.
Although they called him Le Petit Caporal, the little corporal, he never was a corporal.
No.
He went in as an officer.
Yeah.
And he impressed them so much, particularly at the siege of Toulon, with his military tactics, that by the age of 24, he was a brigadier general.
No, it's an extraordinary rise from his background that he had. He clearly had some sort of magnetic ability to bring people on his side. And then, of course, he was made emperor.
Well, he made himself emperor.
Well, exactly. That says so much about the man. And it's an interesting insight to him that he gets.
Well, he wasn't called emperor straight away.
No.
He drafted a constitution which went to a referendum in 1802, and the French public turned out in their droves.
Don't wiki us, Phil.
Well, you're just wittering on with these vague sort of statements. I need to put a bit of flesh on the bones, don't I?
Not really, no.
Well, he became consul for life. He wasn't called the emperor until he, as you would put it, in fact, he didn't crown himself. He went into the ceremony with like a Julius Caesar Roman emperor's leaves. And then it was Charlemagne's crown that he held above his own head that was then placed on his head by somebody else. But from that point, yes, he was an emperor.
Well, he chose to eschew the Pope who was attending, who was meant to be doing the anointing process. And he took that upon himself because he was, in his view, I guess, above the Pope, above everybody else. And he had it's fascinating. He was a boy band in his own way for the French. He was somebody. He was dear old Harry from whatever that band was called, where they just couldn't get enough of him. He was catnip. Whereas for the British, at the same time, and there are odd parallels here with what came the century after. And we sort of forget this because it's long enough ago that people do forget it. The British were terrified of this man, weren't they?
They were terrified of him on land.
Yeah.
They weren't terrified of him on the high seas.
No.
But yeah, they were terrified of an invasion.
But
You said he thought himself bigger than the Pope. I beg to differ, because one of the first things he did, for the first time ever, he struck a concordat with the papacy.
Yeah, he did.
And that concordat gave him carte blanche. And in fact, he was good mates with the Pope, and that's how, before we come on to it, that's how he was able to get his marriage to Josephine annulled.
Yes. But throughout that time, you know, in particular, this area of Britain, so we're talking Sussex, Kent, was in turmoil. And albeit there had previously been beacons for various reasons on hilltops, that whole process of having beacons so that they could be lit, so that the next beacon would see it and that one would be lit and the next one would be lit, became a proper system, because they were deeply fearful that Boney was coming, and young children were told nursery rhymes and horror stories about how Boney would come and get them.
I mean, the beacon system went back to Elizabeth and the Armada, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it wasn't a new system, but yeah, the beacons were reinstated.
Yeah.
Because he by 1811, he was emperor of Europe, effectively.
Yes, he
with the exception of the Balkans, either he or his acolytes ruled Europe.
Well, he had Italy with one of his brothers there as a puppet.
Yeah, the king of Italy that went down as far as Rome. He didn't have southern Italy.
No, because Italy wasn't a country then. He had to fight the Iberian Peninsula, that is Spain and Portugal.
Correct, but the Spaniards gave him a hard time.
He never fought there himself.
No.
It was always his generals, and it was where Wellington, who had grown up, again, oddly enough, not under a cloud, but slightly -1 because he was an Irish officer originally.
Correct.
And so not thought of quite in the same class, but proved, Wellington never lost a battle. And that is an extraordinary detail about him.
He damn well nearly lost Waterloo.
I know exactly that, and he said, he said, there's, I don't like you losing. If I'm paraphrasing now, losing a battle is terrible, but winning it can in fact be worse. As he went across the battlefield of Waterloo, looking at, we'll come on to that maybe on Friday.
You'll let me speak on Friday, will you?
I'll let you speak a little bit, Phil. Not much, Phil. Not much. But it's an odd thing, the way that Napoleon was able to captivate the French.
Well, yes, you say that, but it was really rather fitful. At the time of the referendum, yeah, they loved him to bits. But ironically, because of the isolation of Great Britain, they and a lot of European countries under Napoleon's influence began to miss the trade with Great Britain and the provisions Great Britain's naval power enabled it to provide. I mean, You were saying how scared the British were of Napoleon. You were
But yeah,
absolutely right.
and presumably that would have been the start of just about the start of the Industrial Revolution, which started in Britain.
There's all of that, but you see, because of his overwhelming control of Europe, it became known, didn't it, as the continental system.
Yes.
And effectively, because he didn't just win militarily, he was crafty enough to have treaty after treaty after treaty, allying himself with even Austria.
Yeah.
Prussia was not on. Ironically, Prussia under Blucher wasn't on the radar at this time.
Yeah.
It was nothing like the Prussia we came to know.
Just so we're clear, that people understand, that there wasn't an Italy at that stage in time. There were different states, and they didn't join up until
There wasn't a Germany either.
Well, exactly. So it wasn't until the 1870s that there became a country called Italy, and then around the same time a country called Germany, that within 130 years of it starting ends up.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but I thought the Italian one was 1848 under Garibaldi.
No. It's 1860s at the earliest. He came up through Sicily, and apparently a lot of the people in Sicily who followed him with his red shirts, and he was saying Italia, Italia, and they thought it was his woman. They thought he had some sort of bet on the side called Italia. They had no concept of Italy and the North Italians were quite against the idea. It's and it remains a tension within Italy, because
Italy, and yes, very much north-south divide.
So the North Italians consider themselves to be industrialized and modernized and whatever, whereas they consider the Southern Italians to be peasants. It's not strictly fair, but they do think that, and they behave in that way. In the same way in Germany, there are states in northern Germany that think, for example, here's an example. The films that what's his name? What was his name? The German Californian governor,
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, Schwarzenegger.
Well, he's Austrian.
Yeah, and because he's Austrian, when it came to dubbing the films,
yeah,
they said, we're not going to use you.
Correct.
And he said, why? And they said, because, equivalent in English would be, you sound a bit like that, my dear. You sound a bit yokely. And,
well, he sounded Germanic.
Well, he sounded South Germanic, which is perceived in Germany as being a dialect which is for the subnormal.
Well, another little tangent. Another of my great interests that you know of is World War I.
Yeah.
And
now, careful, Phil, because Keith will definitely have interviewed people from World War One. There's no question.
There's no doubt about that. I'll be very careful.
Yeah.
But there are written accounts of how, when the Germans in the trenches changed regiments, the Bavarians and even the Saxon regiments would put a sign up on the trench so the British could see them, saying, "We're about to be replaced by Prussians, give them hell, Tommy."
Yeah.
True, that's absolutely true.
Well, and it's part of the reason why Napoleon was able to do what he did, because there were these divisions in Europe, and albeit,
Yeah.
you know, he fought the Battle of the Three Emperors and all of that, and people who see the film will see his Grom battery taking out the troops on the other side.
When is this film released?
Yeah, it's released, I think, on Thursday. Right. And I've looked up, it's not yet shown as being available down in Lewis. But Keith, when it is, I'll take you to it.
I'd be very interested in going. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think, you know, the French hate it, but that's because it's an English film about a French icon.
I read a review this morning, which I emailed a Photoshop to you both, but it's an American review. And
yeah.
It talks of the great naval commander, the Duke of Wellington.
Yeah.
Which just shows how much the bloody Yanks know.
Yeah. He was.
But Rupert Everett, an actor I've always liked, Rupert Everett plays Wellington.
Yes.
Anyway,
right.
Back to Fortress Europe. Now.
No, so
that's the analogy.
Dear old Napoleon spent some time, Phil, plotting an invasion of the British Isles, but never succeeded.
Correct.
And
because of the British naval strength.
Yeah, because, you know, at the time the British Navy was, you know, queen of the waves and all that sort of thing. And also, he never, as far as I can see, albeit he had a couple of regiments from there, he never really sought out the soft underbelly, which Keith will appreciate, of the British Isles, which is Ireland. Because you simply go round the other side of the country, you land on Ireland, you have a place then from which you can prepare.
Well, I'm repeating myself, but he didn't have the naval strength.
No.
To do that.
No, you're absolutely right. He didn't.
He's forget the land stuff now. His great nemesis was Nelson.
Utterly, 1805. And
but earlier than that, Nelson stuffed him at the Battle of the Nile.
In Egypt, exactly.
Because Egypt was a big failure for Napoleon. Nelson stuffed him on the seas in 1798. And because of Napoleon's defeat in Egypt, that's how the British were given the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah.
And it's now in the British Museum. It was Napoleon's armies that found the Rosetta Stone.
Good morning.
Morning.
And it's you know, that thin channel, 20 odd miles wide, has served us well.
Yes, but you're right to mention Trafalgar. That was the victory.
Yeah, that you know, that just because that was France and Spain, and dear old Nelson, bless him, took them out, and they would never be a threat to the British Isles again, which is a wonderful thing. But just move. Go ahead.
Well, you're going to tell us what his huge military mistake was, aren't you?
Well, it's an interesting conundrum because he fell into two errors, and maybe later in the week, because this is a two broadcast topic.
Well, you're on your own on Friday, Richard.
Am I?
Yeah.
That's fine. He chose firstly to try to invade the British Isles and failed. Didn't really even begin to start that process.
Exactly. But he did start something else, didn't he?
Yeah, he went and took on generals January and February, as they're known.
In Russia.
He went to Russia, and hence the 1812 overture, because that's about him taking territory there. But
well, he got to Moscow.
He got to Moscow, yeah. But equally, people say armies are decimated. Decimated, in fact, means 1 in 10 die. And his Grande Armée, which was over 100,000 men, it was more like 9 in 10 died.
Sorry to be a stato. He
Yeah,
went with 400,000 troops.
Okay. What did he come back with?
Less than 40,000 came back.
Okay, so he came back with less than 10%.
Absolutely right.
And
which, as you say, is not decimation.
No, it's not decimation.
It's annihilation.
Utterly so. And of course,
the Russian winter has been a great ally, hasn't it, to the Russians in getting rid of both Napoleon and Hitler.
Well, this is exactly the point, Keith. Sorry, Phil.
These are the parallels, Keith. There are parallels with Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
Not just Russia, that's one of them. Ironically, Hitler was always called a little corporal by President Hindenburg because he was an Austrian corporal from the First World War. Napoleon's military tactics that Richard's alluded to were the then equivalent of blitzkrieg.
Yep.
Because Napoleon used artillery and the tactics of attacking the flanks of the enemy with mobile artillery, which is like a blitzkrieg. Yeah. And then you've got Fortress Europe, which is effectively what the continental system was. So the comparisons with Hitler, I think, are quite interesting.
I couldn't agree with you more, Phil, that, Napoleon tried and failed. And it is an interesting feature of Adolf Hitler's time that he didn't really learn the lessons from that.
No, because the Russian retreat absolutely, as we've discussed, just annihilated his army.
Oh, yeah.
And he then lost a year later. He took on the Austrians at Leipzig, and it was the first battle he'd lost in 1813.
Yes.
And that was the beginning of the end.
There is that beautiful painting of him that I would encourage people to look up.
On the White Horse?
Well, Napoleon crossing the Alps.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And you of course, it's not realistic, it's stylized. But you look at it and you think, good grief, I can understand why a lot of middle-aged men with tashes, the guard, not only followed him but re-followed him and were loyal to him because he was a terribly charismatic character. And Phil, I'm sorry that you're not able to make it on Friday because
I was pulling your leg.
I
What's not going to make it on Friday?
good because I wanted to talk about the
But you've
second
got to
half
let me
of
say something.
second half of this talk will be about the 100 days.
Yes, quite so.
But
well, shall we draw this segment, since you're ready to segue into the next on Friday, by saying that the one thing that strikes me about Napoleon, never having met him or interviewed him, is that I am a great admirer of Mad Jack Fuller, who was MP for Lewis in the late 1700s, early 1800s, in the Napoleonic period, and who.
And you did interview him, did you, Keith?
I not quite. I got to Lewis' house just a day or two after he'd moved out.
Right.
But he, of course, and still extant today, are a number of follies. And people say, what were these for? But historically, it was said that he actually built them so that he could go to the top and keep his eye on the Napoleonic Wars, in case, in fact, Napoleon got into the ascendancy and did invade Britain. So we have right here still evidence, archaeological evidence of that period in which Napoleon was in the ascendance.
Keith, I think you need to just take fewer medications. I've got to say, but yeah, we hear what you say.
Richard, before we do the 100 days on Friday and thereafter, we need to get him onto Elba in this program, don't we?
We can do that on Friday. Don't worry. Yeah, you know your ass from the Elba, so it's fine, Phil. Don't you worry.
Very witty.
And,
Keith mentioned Elba.
Keith has, he's got Gloria Hunniford and co lining up, ready to interview, so he doesn't need us.
He's never needed us.
No,
I don't know why he bothers with us.
I think it's some sort of community project where he gets paid to.
I'm one of those very fierce executive producers. It's all about the ratings, mate.
Oh, bloody hell! And I can tell you now, Phil, that when the dog and his one man leaves the TV, Keith will tell us, and we'll be gone. I promise you, we'll be talking to each other.
I have to say that immediately on this thing called Next Door, which is supposed to be the very, very local thing, is you got 98 people watching the other day within 5 minutes of going on the air.
Yeah, well, that's Phil's.
I don't know whether any of them had a dog.
Well, you ought to ask them that, Keith, because I've got mine with me, and you know where he's going to be in about 2.5 hours' time.
Right. Okay. I shall look forward to seeing him here. Now we have Stuart Dolby, who, incidentally, when we're talking about wars, of course, has spent a lot of time in Vietnam as a reporter, who is ready to come on and take a look at a couple of events in the news. So can I look forward to seeing you on Friday?
Lovely, Keith. That was very kind of you to let us witter on about things. We've got a bit more to say about the Peninsular War, and then we'll move on to the last days of Napoleon. Philip will put his hand into his shirt like that. Your trilby sideways like Napoleon. Exactly that. And we'll all be Napoleon Bonaparte. I won't show you.
He he was painted with his hand inside his waistcoat, if that's what it was, because it was deemed to be a sign of authority, but also peace and control. That's what that apparently is meant to symbolise. Whether he ever actually did that, nobody really knows.
He was just
probably just washing his wallet.
Yeah, he was just touching himself up. Let's be fair, Phil.
Sorry, Keith, is that the landlord,
Okay.
Declan? Is that
Sorry?
Declan the landlord serving
That's
you with
Declan,
coffee?
the marvelous Declan,
Yeah.
who is that people have started to send in little notes saying what a marvelous chap he is.
He
I
is.
said to him, it's dreadful coming in here at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, to be greeted by a saint.
No. He's, you know, you're the wanton deck, the pair of you. There's no question about that.
Just so you both know, and I've told you, again, I've got driver's duty from 9 o'clock on Friday.
Okay.
So I will have to finish by 5 to 9.
Okay. Well, we can do 8 o'clock, can't we?
Yes, we can. We can do it 7:45 if you wish.
7:45. Yeah.
Could we do 07:45?
Yes.
Yes. That is what is known as 7:45.
Yes, but I have to make it clear because Keith gets confused, and so do you.
I neither of us get confused, Phil. It's you who are the confusing one.
Now listen.
Okay, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. Yeah. Right. I'm going to say goodbye to you because
Yes.
Stuart wants to tell us about our next guest, who is a famous war correspondent. So we're carrying on with the theme this morning. So
Right.
Toodle pip, and I'll see you later.
See you, Keith. Good to see you, mate.
Bye. Right now, would Mr. Stuart Dolby come and tell us who our next guest is? Where is he? Where are you, Stuart? Right, come and lean over my shoulder and who our next guest is.
Well, it's my great friend and comrade in arms, so to speak, is John Swain.
Right.
And John Swain was with us in Indochina.
All right, well, sit down and talk to people.
Right.
Right.
Well, he's about to appear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you who John Swain is.
Yes. Right.
John Swain was with me, a war correspondent in Indochina, whereas me and other people were concentrating on Vietnam. John concentrated on Cambodia because he was absolutely a Francophile. He spoke French very, very fluently and so forth and so on. And he was in, I don't know if you've ever seen the film The Killing Fields, but he was a major figure in that.
In The Killing Fields,
and he was very, very,
very frightening. Very frightening. Yeah.
It was very frightening. But the fact is that people say to me, were you on one of the helicopters going out from Vietnam? And I said, no, I didn't, because at that stage, the Vietnamese had lost and there was no need to go out. But John, when he was offered a place on the boat, said no. He was a stringer, a part-time journalist for Sunday Times, and Sunday Times sent its big guns in. So he said, look, when it comes to it, Stuart, will you get Jacqueline out? Jacqueline was his girlfriend, and she was half French and half Vietnamese. And she actually wouldn't leave. So John actually said, will you get Jacqueline out? And so John said, well, I'm going to Cambodia because, I'm being aged out by the others. And he stayed on there until the very end. And he nearly got killed. I said, don't go to Cambodia because you'll get killed. And he very nearly did. If anybody has ever seen this wonderful picture called The Killing Fields. And after that, he was made. He was Journalist of the Year and then so forth and so forth. And he continued to do other wars in Eritrea, I think, after that. And he did one in New Guinea and God knows what else.
Okay, well, your guest will be here very shortly.
Okay.
I've managed to get a submarine up there for no particular reason. So we're going to go away for 5 minutes. We shall set up properly, and we shall have John Swain along with Stuart Dolby in conversations with Stuart Dolby. So give us 5 minutes, and we will be back. From Lewis in the Black Horse